Alright, here's a much awaited CBR600RR review. I'm going to try to cover the positive and the negative about it. There's not really much negative to cover, but what there is I will talk about. But starting off with what's probably the most important thing when you're looking at a sport bike, the handling, I would assume is what you're looking at if you're looking at a super sport. This bike handles tremendously. It has that Unit Pro Link rear end. It's got decent stock tires. I'm fine with the stock brakes, suspension, brake lines even. I haven't even switched to the stainless lines. I thought about it, but the stock brakes have amazing stopping power. I've had no complaints about it at all. It saved my ass on a couple turns, coming in with way too much speed. It just doesn't seem to have any problem transitioning from heavy braking into heavy acceleration. It's extremely stable. The Honda electronic steering damper, HESD, is phenomenal. I've ridden a Super Sport without a steering damper. I've ridden it with that Öhlins on the ZX10R, and those are okay, but I just see a lot more head shake on those bikes, especially if you like to loft the front end. And make no mistake, out of a lot of 600s won't, the 600RR will power wheelie. It will come right off the ground in first gear. It doesn't do it in second, not even close, because it barely does it in first. But if you're sitting back in the seat, if you're sitting real far forward on the tank and you weigh a lot, it's not going to come up on its own. But if I'm sitting back in the seat and I weigh 180 pounds, if I sit back in the seat and just crack the throttle wide open, don't have to let it off at first or anything, just crack it wide open, the bike will pull up under its own power. And it'll stay up throughout most of first gear and come back down pretty gently. And that's impressive as far as I'm concerned for a 600cc bike, because a lot of the 600s won't do it. I think the only other one I got to power wheelie was the aside from the old 636. I did it on a 636, but the only 07 to 08 was my buddy's I think it's an 08 R6, and it did it. He also has a +2 on the rear sprocket, and he said factory he didn't power wheelie it. So as far as I know, this is the only bike that power wheelies that easy from the factory. The only 600. Anyway, moving on. Power is another key issue if you're considering different 600s. Maybe you just have brand loyalty and you're going to go with one just because it's the brand that you want. But for me, I'm all about numbers. So I wanted the 600 with a lot of power. In 07 to 08, the CBR600RR made more horsepower at the crank than any other 600. That was kind of big for me. I saw that and I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. That and the Honda electronic steering damper alone could pretty much sell me. But if that's not enough, and it does have a top speed, and this is pretty universal in the 600s, it has a top speed of over 160. They claim 165, and factory you might be able to get it to 165 indicated, but that's not going to be your actual speed. You're going to be somewhere in the mid to upper 150s. One of the nice things about this with the factory gearing and factory equipment, the speedometer is really close to accurate. And really close is a relative term, but it's at 52 miles an hour, I'm going like 50 miles an hour actual speed. So it's only about a 4% speedometer error, and I've seen speedometer errors in excess of 10%. So that's actually a really small one. So you don't really have to think about how fast you're actually going as much if you're in a cruise a little bit over the speed limit. You can almost just rely on the speedometers, what it's indicating to you, without getting a speedo healer. If you want to change your gearing, obviously that goes out the window. But stock, this bike has a pretty accurate speedometer. I like the instrumentation a lot. It has a fuel gauge, which you don't see on every bike. It has the fuel gauge is it's not accurate, but it's precise. So you can rely on it once you get used to where each bar is going to drop. You can rely on how much gas you have left in the tank. It is not, well, accurate. It's hard to describe it, but I'll just try to explain it. It's not consistent as far as one bar to the next bar, but from tank to tank it is. So if you're riding the riding bike, I almost always lose the first bar. It has 7 bars, and then it starts flashing. So it's essentially an eighth of a tank every time a bar disappears in an eighth of a tank, and then when it starts flashing, it's the last eighth. you can't rely on it being an eighth of a tank because it just doesn't add up that way. You lose the first bar after like 40 or 50 miles, and you lose the second bar after like 72, and then the third bar after like 95, and it's just, it's pretty much the same every tank, but bar to bar it's not even. I don't know why that is. I don't really care because I'm completely used to the way it is, and I always know how much mileage I have left in the bike. The flickability, I know they use that term a lot describing bikes, is amazing. It's so light up top. Sitting on the bike, if you just go sit on one and throw a leg over and pick it up, it just feels so much lighter. And that's kind of surprising with that undertail exhaust from the factory and all that factory crap on the rear end. It still feels incredibly light. Comfort is another big issue. To me, it's the most comfortable one out there, and I've read a lot of reviews where they seem to think the same thing. For street riding, if you want to do even if you want to do street and track riding, if you plan on riding on the street, the 600RR is the way to go because it's very comfortable for a super sport. I'm not going to tell you that you can go take this bike on an 8-hour trip and get off and be like, yeah, that was fun. I've taken it on a 10-hour road trip, and I'll tell you what, it's miserable. Past 3 hours, this bike starts to get pretty uncomfortable. If you have a different seat on it and bar risers, yeah, I'm sure it would be very comfortable, but for me, I'm 6 or 6'1", and I've got longer legs, my back starts to hurt being hunched over on it, and it's just overall not comfortable for long distance, but you're not going to find any super sport that is. Back to power, there is one of my few one of my few complaints of the bike is there's this awkward power surge, it feels like, right over 3,000 RPMs. It's between 3,000 and 3,500. It only happens in first gear. It's kind of there in second gear, but not really. And it's not something dangerous or anything. It's just not smooth power delivery all the way from idling to redline. It lurches forward a little bit at like 3,200 RPMs. I short shift before 3,200, so I don't feel it when I'm riding around town. But if I pull away from a stoplight a little bit quicker or something, or if you're entering a turn, this is the only time I could ever see it being an issue. If you're entering a turn in first gear and were to be hovering right around 3,000 and accelerate a little bit mid-turn, it'll lurch forward on you, and it's not enough to kick the back tire out on you, but it'll be awkward, and it'll cause you to have to correct. And I don't really like the idea of that, so I go through turns in second gear or slower in first gear. Not really an issue, just something to be aware of. Other thing is gas mileage, not good. Mid-30s is probably what you'll average on it. I get upper 30s when I ride a little bit more conservatively, 38, 39. Low 40s, riding very conservatively, and then when I'm like hypermiling, just trying to squeeze the best gas mileage out of it, I can get 50, maybe 52, I think is the best I've gone on it. Not impressive. It's not going to be great on road trips if you're looking for something more fuel efficient. But for the fun factor, the miles per gallon is way up there. It is just an exceptional amount of power for a 600cc bike. It feels great in the mid-range, which makes it a much more streetable bike than the other 600s, because they've really boosted. The low-end power is decent, and the mid-range power is really, really good. You don't need to send this bike up to $9,000 to start pulling like the old 600RRs. This bike will pull fine at 4,000 RPMs. It's not going to throw you back in your seat at 4,000. That'll happen more about 6,000 RPMs, but it still feels great. The increase in power is very smooth. It's not linear. It is like a upward sloping curve. But the power does start to increase dramatically about 6,000 RPMs, and it continues to increase till about 11, and then from I think maybe 11 or 12 through 15, you're still accelerating hard. It doesn't start to drop off or anything. I can shift the bike at redline. It seems to take abuse very well on the engine, riding it real hard. It doesn't really overheat. It starts to cool down. I've had it sent up to 227 degrees, and then the fan kicked in and it brought it back down to like 190 for me. The bike's been incredibly reliable. It's never left me stranded. I've never had issue one with it. You keep up on the scheduled maintenance on it, and it's just fill it up and forget about it. It's just been a great bike. Been unbelievably reliable. Really fast for a 600, and I think it's the best looking bike out there, and you guys can make your own call on that. If you have any other questions about the bike, just feel free to ask and I'll answer them as soon as I get around to it.